Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and greetings to everyone. Welcome to the Mullah Asghar Library and Islamic Resource Center, otherwise known as MARC, for our program Conversations with Authors. Every month, we plan to invite an author or an academic from the Muslim community to join us to talk about their work and to answer some questions. More about that later, including some of your feedback. My name is Shabir Jaffa, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm one of the directors here at MARC. I'll introduce today's guest momentarily, but before I do that, let me tell you a little bit about MARC. The Mullah Asghar Memorial Library and Islamic Resource Center, or MARC for short, is named after the late Mullah Asghar Ali MM Jaffa, who was a scholar and a beacon of the Khoja Shia Itnashri community. We have three key strands of work here at MARC. Firstly, knowledge navigation. MARC works to make Islamic knowledge accessible by maintaining an Islamic library that is available 7 days a week, having seminar space available for Islamic classes and discussion groups, and hosting various children's groups, producing exhibitions that promote Islamic learning, and providing links to resources for further Islamic studies on its website. The second area of work is heritage. MARC works to preserve and promote learning about the heritage of the Khoja Shia Itnashri community through the collection and preservation of heritage texts, hosting a permanent wing dedicated to Khoja history, as well as short-term exhibitions highlighting aspects of Khoja heritage, and producing and publishing a literary and multimedia materials about Khoja history. And thirdly, interfaith work. MARC works to improve relations between people of different faiths by hosting interfaith events, opening its doors to visiting school groups, and others who would like to hear more about Islam and the Shia Itnashri faith. We create exhibitions and multimedia that encourage learning about the different religions and interfaith dialogue. If you'd like to know more, please visit our website at marcresource.org. You can also sign up to receive news of our future events and access videos of past ones. So let's meet today's author now. It's my pleasure to welcome Professor Hassan Abbas, who is joining us from Washington, D.C. in the USA. Professor Hassan Abbas is Distinguished Professor of International Relations at the Near East South Asia Strategic Studies Center, known as NESA, at the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. He serves as a senior advisor at the Project on Shi'ism and Global Affairs at Harvard University's Weatherhead Center for International Affairs. His current research work focuses on building narratives for countering political and religious extremism and law enforcement reforms in developing states. He recently published a highly acclaimed biography entitled The Prophet's Heir, The Life of Ali ibn Abu Talib, and that's the subject of our discussion today. The work covers arguably the single most important spiritual and intellectual authority in Islam after the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that of course is Imam Ali. Earlier, Professor Abbas served as professor and department chair at the National Defense University's College of International Security Affairs, and as the distinguished Quaid Azam Professor at Columbia University. He holds a PhD and an MALD from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, an LLM in International Law from Nottingham University in the UK, and an MA in Political Science from the Punjab University in Pakistan. Professor Abbas has appeared on various television shows on CNN, Fox News, The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, Newshour with Jim Lehrer, The Charlie Rose Show, MSNBC, C-SPAN, and various programs on CBS and NBC as an analyst on security-related issues in South Asia and the Middle East. I do want to quickly acknowledge one person who contributed to making this happen today, and that is none other than Sheikh Hasnain Qasim Ali of Toronto. Sheikh Hasnain contacted me about 2 months ago saying, or asking if I had planned to talk to Professor Abbas, and I said I did, but I had him planned for later in the year, later in the summer, should I say. Sheikh Hasnain very dutifully said, Ramadan would be the right time to do this for obvious reasons, because it is about Imam Ali. And so I quickly complied. Thank you, Sheikh, for that. Appreciate the input, and keep listening in. And thank you again. So, Professor Abbas, Assalamu alaikum, and thanks for joining us today.
Wa alaikum assalam. It's a pleasure to be with you.
It's great to have you here. I've watched a couple of your interviews with the Ummah organization and some other centers, and it's so good to have you on our own program here in Toronto. So let's get to the questions right away. Professor, tell us about your journey towards writing this book. I know you're an academic, and so as an academic, you either publish or you perish, as they say. But what motivated you to write this particular book?
Again, thank you very much to your organization, to you, Shabir Sahab, and Hassan Walji, and many other friends in Canada. My journey has been quite fascinating, and it has been a journey at multiple levels, I should say. When I say multiple levels, at one level it is from Pakistan to United States. At another level, it is from a police officer to be an academic. In my old life, I was, through competitive examination, a police officer. And my wife aptly calls this journey from a police officer to an academic as a journey from a cop to a human being. And there is another level of journey. I thank you very much for your very extensive bio that you shared with all the audience. I'm trained as a scholar of international relations. So my work mostly has been on security issues. So the another journey was from a security studies professor to writing something on religion and spirituality. So this has been, I think what enabled me to do that is the educational environment at my home when I was growing up. My father was a professor. My grandfather was a headmaster of a small village school in Punjab. So I'm a third generation teacher. And my mother was also very educated. Both, God bless their souls, they both passed away years ago. My mother, other than being a housewife, was an artist. She was a painter. So and I remember whenever we were moving from one place to the other, it was not moving the house furniture. The biggest thing was moving the books. So I always saw my father every night reading a book. And that's what I think inspired me. And that is something which was so central to my journey in this direction.
Great answer. Thank you. Talking of your book, I finished reading it 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I'll tell you, it still lingers in my mind and in my thoughts, and especially now during the month of Ramadan, as we're coming up to that fateful night, the 19th of Ramadan. But I think what struck me most was it was not just erudite, but it was readable too. It was well researched, and it could appeal to both an academic as well as a layperson like me. I learned so much from it about the life and times of Imam Ali that I didn't know before, and I suspect our listeners would too. So thank you for educating us in that way. And so I'll get to the first question, which actually struck me on page 5, where you wrote that while researching for this book, you concluded that varying sectarian accounts of Imam Ali's life and legacy offer an incomplete and disingenuous picture. Why did you think that?
Great question. I think it is because various Muslim communities have boxed Imam Ali in their own narratives. And in these boxes, they want to view him through their own specific selected sources. And they don't want to go beyond that circle. And these are concentric circles. And in our effort to be very loyal to our own narrative, we forget about or we ignore some of the beautiful references and stories and anecdotes which are available elsewhere. And I was thinking that we need to have an inclusive narrative which borrows from all different traditions. And while I was trying to do that, I would clearly see that a beautiful story is available in an old Orthodox biography of Imam Ali, but never mentioned in our present day narrative. So it was that what gave me the idea. And also, then again, I think, with all the due respect, in the Ahl Sunnah tradition, and as I previously had mentioned, perhaps in our personal conversation, I borrow from both traditions in my family, of the Sunni and Shia tradition. I had seen that there is, in the Sunni tradition, there has been some reluctance some reluctance to get into the most controversial and sensitive of the issues. So
Hmm.
the Shia Sunnis get together, they both say Imam Ali was great. Well, we will not touch what happened at Saqifa. We will not touch what happened with Fatima. So that I thought, that, and on the to be fair, on the Shia side, at times the Sufi tradition's resources are not touched at all. And I asked many of the leading great scholars, from whom I owe everything to religious scholars who inspired me and who gave me ideas and gave me the proper context where to frame. I realized there is a reluctance to go to those traditions of Irfan and Sufism among the
Hmm.
Shia, as if,
Hmm.
okay, we will lose our people to Sufism. So that is what led to this statement.
See, okay. Um, that's an interesting perspective, and it later, and I think I'll come back to that later, because there's another question I want to ask you in the same vein. But for now, on page 7, you referred to Rasulullah's famous declaration that he made 3 times at Ghadir Qum before he passed away, and that was, of course, Man kuntu mawla fahada aliyun mawla, which means whomever I am his master, Ali is also his master. Your assessment is that Shias and Sunnis interpreted that particular statement differently. For Shias, you say it was an unequivocal designation of Imam Ali as successor of the Holy Prophet, while the Ahl Sunnah say that it was a call for Ali to be held in high esteem and affection, rather than a confirmation of succession. I put to you, however, Professor, that at that point in Islamic history, there were no Sunnis or Shias. There was just Muslims. Over 100 of the Holy Prophet's companions on that day at Ghadir Qum recorded and heard that declaration. So, what really was the dynamic that led to those 2 different interpretations of that statement? Was it tribalism, simple tribalism, in a play for power between the Banu Hashim and the Banu Umayyah?
Another very thought-provoking question. That's true. Those factors that you mentioned were at play. But let me go back into that point of history. So everyone there, when they heard the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to give that declaration, they all rushed towards Imam Ali and they all greeted him. So at that moment, there was jubilation, except 1 or 2 people who actually challenged it. There's an interesting story what happened to them. So everyone greeted him. I think, and this is very interesting, that later on, when the issues happened, whether after Saqifa or with the other caliphs, Imam Ali, to the best of my knowledge, never used Ghadir as, or what happened at Ghadir, as an evidence of his right to
To
spiritual aid.
succeed. Mm-hmm.
He used for other issues. I
Yes.
think that moment was so clear that the Prophet ﷺ had handed over his spiritual heir status or spiritual succession to Imam Ali. And that's how everyone took it. I think, and it's very clear, very important to recognize that the office of the political office, so to say, was not seen as part of this by many. So everyone was convinced, and that's why when it comes to any crisis about religious issues, the first 3 caliphs, as the Abu Bakr, Umar, Usman, would always refer it to Imam Ali. Always.
Mm-hmm.
They knew that they would not even go deep into some of the religious theological issues. On all matters of jurisprudence, so to say, at that time, Sharia, which was developing, had started to develop, Imam Ali was the authority, always.
Yes.
So Ghadir Qum was seen by whether Shia or Sunni, at that time you so rightly mentioned, everyone, as the title which gave away succession, the spiritual succession, which was the most important one. The political succession can be different channels. This status or title was God given. And that's how I think everyone took it, or by and large. Those who avoided it later on, and those who contested it, saying that it is not directed towards political office. And there, some of the personal political ambitions came into play.
Right. How different history would have been had they all accepted it for what it was at the time. In your book, there are many examples of Imam Ali's character, his valor, his wisdom, integrity, generosity to the underprivileged, his knowledge, and his humbleness. There was even a verse in the Holy Quran that was revealed right after he gave his ring to the beggar in the mosque while still in prostration, still in sajda. Isn't it therefore remarkable that certain Muslims of that era made his and his family's life so difficult?
That's true. It's tragic also, and it's because of our, again, colored lens that so many different groups of Muslims use. They either want to avoid it or ignore it, and distortion of history had also played a very important role in all this. I would also say that the fact is that those were all those around the Prophet ﷺ were human beings. And at
Yes.
times in this modern, the way these status and characters are built about some of the very important companions of the Prophet, they lose this point that they were political rivalries, they were tribal rivalries, they were personal issues. They all claimed they were all very close to the Prophet. Let's acknowledge that. And
Yeah.
we cannot deny that many other leading companions had played a very important role. They, at some time, they believed that they had the right, and they realized that without Al Bayt, they have to keep them aside. There's a famous quote that I mentioned in the book. Hazrat Abdullah ibn Abbas asked the second caliph, Hazrat Umar. Actually, Hazrat Umar asked him, why do you think Ali is not taking part in all these military campaigns? And why do you believe Ali is a little he didn't use the word angry. He said he's not as cooperative or friendly as Hazrat Umar expected him to be.
Yeah.
And Hazrat Abdullah ibn Abbas said, well, this is because he believes that you have taken away his right. And then, in his defense,
Mm.
somewhat, if I may dare say, apologetically, Hazrat Umar said, well, no one would have accepted that both prophethood and caliphate goes into the hands of Banu Hashim.
Mhm.
So he framed it. It is on record in Tabri, all Sunni sources. So
Right.
that was his justification.
Yeah.
And then others went farther than this. Of course, Muawiyah and Banu Umayyah, the atrocities and the violence committed by them was purely out of their greed, out of their viciousness, and out of their total lack of awareness about what Islam is. That's about
Yeah.
the Banu Umayyah.
Yeah. So tribalism definitely played a part in the shocking way that they treated Imam Ali and his family. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You very movingly described the episode of the Holy Prophet on his deathbed, asking his companions for pen and paper. What does your research tell you about why some of those companions denied him this simple request and provoking an argument while he lay there? If they could disrespect the Holy Prophet like that while he still breathed, what was to stop them doing so even worse to his family after he passed?
I was particularly curious to find out from the scholars in the Sunni tradition how they interpret this, because this is in some of the most important hadith books. This is mentioned by Ibn Ishaq. This is in all major Sunni as well as, of course, Shia books.
Yeah.
And the interpretation that I got is that, well, at that time, the Prophet was very ill, and those who said we don't want to give him pen and paper, they didn't want to bother him. That is one justification, as hollow as it may appear. And the second issue was, some people raised this question that, well, Imam Ali was also there. He could have
Yeah.
given the pen. And we don't know from history whether he was there or not. We cannot deny, we cannot accept it. I think the real issue here is also, actually, in one of the major Shia historical works I learned, that the next day, the family members of the Prophet actually went to the Prophet and said, well, here's pen and paper. You wanted to write something yesterday. Can you write
Mm.
it? And the Prophet said, no, the moment
No.
has passed. Whatever I wanted to say, I have already said.
Yes.
Then there's another way to look at it. If it was, let's say, the Prophet had to say something extremely important, which was a divine injunction, then it would have happened in some shape or the form. But going back to the point, yes, people had raised the voice, and that was totally unacceptable. And that was a direct violation of a verse from the Holy Quran, where they have said, keep your voices low, behave in front of your Prophet. So this is an absolute evidence of how some people at that time were either anxious
Yes.
or a kind of extremely worried, and that's a very tragic part of Islamic history.
Right.
However, in one case of a leading Sunni scholar, not to justify, I asked this question about the interpretation, and he said to me, "Well, yes, the Prophet wanted to write the name of the next caliph, and he wanted to write the name of Hazrat Abu Bakr.
Mm.
Now, I have no way to deny it or decline or say that no, I have some other
Yeah.
information. So it's a complicated issue, but the core issue is that yes, a very unfortunate incident happened, and that is evidence that something was wrong. Some companions or some people, we know some names, we don't know all names,
Yeah.
and some people would add more names to it. But that tells us that these issues had started propping up uh, actually much before
Mm.
the death of the Prophet.
All right. There is a chapter in the book called Succession Politics, and in it you gave us more insight into what was going on behind the scenes in the hours immediately after the Holy Prophet's death. Um, Essentially, it was a bid for power between the dominant tribes at a meeting of Muslims called Saqifa. Would you agree that the most pivotal part of that meeting lay in the fact that neither Imam Ali or his supporters, like Salman Farsi or Miqdad, were invited to attend that meeting? I mean, they were helping him bury the Prophet or prepare the Prophet for burial, of course, but had they been present to advocate for Ali as the successor, things might have turned out differently, or was the die already cast, do you think?
This is again an extremely important question because this is debated, but this was all kind of pre-decided, and this was all a setup, or this happened at the spur of the moment.
Mm.
Again, one keeps on learning, and I hope to be corrected if I'm wrong, and this journey of seeking knowledge continues. My understanding is that it was more of a some decisions were made earlier, but this exact event happened out of the blue. The way it happened at Saqifa, because we know that Saad ibn Ibadah, who was there at Saqifa, he wanted it for himself, and there were
Yeah.
people who raised the voice. They said, "We will not give a bayah to anyone but Imam Ali." So Imam Ali's name was raised, and no one challenged that. No, it will not happen. And perhaps others knew that Imam Ali and all of his close associates were busy burying the Prophet.
Yeah.
So that is true. I think that this was more that if Hazrat Salman Farsi, Miqdad, and Ammar Yasir, Abu Zar Ghafari, if they were there, it would have been extremely hard for
Yeah.
anyone to pull it off in any other direction. In
Right.
that sense, that the timing of this, in fact, convinces many of the Shia scholars that look, the timing was so perfect from point of view of someone else having an interest. Um, I get the impression that it's the reality is that Imam Ali was not ready to, and this can we can talk later on in detail.
Yeah.
My understanding is that for Imam Ali, the office of the caliphate was not very important.
Hmm.
If it would have been very important, he would have taken a stand. So
Yeah.
this is very important. His right was taken away, but he had said this in a face-to-face conversation later, with which I found the text in one
Yeah.
of the old manuscripts. Imam Ali, when had a conversation with Hazrat Abu Bakr after Saqifa had happened, and the worker gave his own defense. In his defense, he said, "Well, things had happened suddenly. We never wanted to isolate you or keep you out." And Imam
Yeah.
Ali said, "Okay, that's fine." And later on as well, he said a few things to the point that so long as basic principles of Islam are followed, even if there's an injustice to me, I'm ready to accept. And that's why he cooperated. That
Yes.
point has to be kept in mind as well.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, he wasn't power hungry, as you say. Appropriately, as it is the month of Ramadan, the holy month, I'd like to talk about the fateful 19th night when Imam Ali was assassinated by Ibn Muljam of the Khwarijites group. There's a question that I have to ask. It's been bothering me. Every time I listen to the majalis from the mimbar on 19th night for the last umpteen years, it's bothered me. And that is, here we have Ali ibn Abu Talib, the Amir al-Mu'mineen, the fourth caliph of the Islamic Empire. He's praying in the main mosque of Kufa, which is now the capital of the Muslim Empire, the capital city, because Imam Ali moved it from Medina to Kufa. Muawiyah, his enemy, has just recently had Ali's governor Malik Ashtar assassinated. It's common knowledge that the Khwarijites hated Imam Ali and sought vengeance for their defeat at the Battle of Narawan. The situation in the city is very tense. And so I ask, he's coming to mosque to pray. Where was the security detail for Amir al-Mu'mineen? How was that assassin allowed to enter the mosque with a concealed, poisoned sword to commit his evil act? I mean, it doesn't make sense. Did your research uncover anything there?
Very thought-provoking questions. I must say, this is, since my book came out in March, this is my, I think, 15th book talk, and I'm extremely thankful to all. And your questions are the most thought-provoking, and thank you very much for such a detailed reading of my book. I mean, I had the beginning with Hassan Abbas, which was one of the finest programs, and since then, it's this program, very thoughtful questions. I will wear my hat as a former police officer to answer this.
Yeah.
Which is that, look, at that time, the understanding of security parameters was not like it is today. Secondly, Ibn Muljam was, from his point of view, was very smart. What he did was, he went to the mosque a night before, and this is actually, I had always heard this from my late father, who was also a professor, Hassan Abbas, and he used to tell us, when as kids we used to sleep at night on your back, and he would say, no, don't sleep on your back. The reason being that your back is on top and you're facing down when you're sleeping on the pillow. And he would say, because this is how Ibn Muljam slept a night before this event, because he wanted to hide his sword. So this is ingrained in my mind from that, what I'd heard. I couldn't read it in the historical factions, but historical narratives. I don't. My father had read somewhere, and I trust that. So this is one part, is that he had smuggled in the sword a night before. On that morning, he picked a very smart timing. He knew that Imam Ali, he knew, was not somebody who would lived in palace or who would have so many people around him. After all, he was the bravest of the brave. After all, he is the victor of the Khyber and Uhud, and you name a battlefield, there was no one braver than him. So it would have looked good that he needed a security guard. No. And then the prayer had started. Everyone was in that prayer. So Ibn Muljam had placed himself in a point, whether he's in a front row in the corner, everyone is praying, they are in Jamaat, and everyone, when they go down, then nobody's looking, even if there is a guard who's praying.
Yes.
And then he rushed, and that's why he was stopped immediately, and that's why actually his sword first hit the top of the wall there, and that's why it was the strike was not as definitive. That's why it took. I mean, that meant more pain for our Imam. But that's my answer to that.
Yes. So okay. So I didn't know that he actually snuck into the mosque the night before, and that's how he was able to get in as well as conceal the sword that really should have been seen or confiscated or whatever. But anyway, that's something I didn't realize. Thank you for that. In the chapter on Imam Ali's legacy, you state, I quote, "He may be buried, but his spirit lives. It lives on in the lips of poets, in the hearts of people, in the spirit of mystics, and the minds of intellectuals," unquote. How do you explain this sense of reverence by so many 1400 years later?
Thank you so much. One, it is a realization by most Muslims, irrespective of their sectarian identities, that when they read Man kuntu Mawla Fahaza Aliin Mawla, when they read Ana Madinatul Ilmi wa Aliin Babuha, when they read Surah Yasin and they see even the Sunni sources when they say Wama kulla shayin ahsaynahu fi imamin mubin, and people ask who is Imam Mubin, and the source is actually Hazrat Abu Bakr and Hazrat Umar. They were the ones who had asked the Prophet, according to the Shia historians,
Yes.
and the Prophet had said, Hazrat Abu Bakr and Umar said, Sayyidina, who is Imam Mubin? And the Prophet said, Ali. So that's the source. So anyone who look at all the verses, anyone who will look at dispassionately at the history will see that Ali was nothing but a true reflection of all that Prophet stood for.
Yes.
Secondly, this feeling that injustice was done to Ali. I think that creates a sympathy. Whosoever in our ordinary lives, I mean, why is Imam Hussein loved that much? Because even a person who's not Muslim, anyone who
Yes.
sees the tragedy, the massacre, the crisis, and they'll say, who are these people? Why are they? I mean, they went through this crisis. There's a love and sympathy. So the
Yes.
sympathy is also because recognizing what was his status, why he was not given what it was due, and third, the realization. I mean, Imam Ali was not only surpassed everyone else in bravery and in scholarship, but also in his speeches, in his poetry, in his
Yes.
sermons. That
Mhm.
have inspired all the Sufi traditions. There's a reason for it.
Yeah.
There's a reason that 12 out of the 13 silsilas see Imam Ali as the patron saint. I think it's a combination of all these factors.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, Quran says in the famous verse, Innama waliyukum, there's no one else who can ever claim that status. Your
Right.
helper and supporter is God, the Prophet, and those who give zakat during prayer. No one else has claimed ever among the
Right.
companions that I am
Yes.
the one who's the third person. So it is Imam Ali is so much head and shoulders above anyone else.
Mm.
Not loving him would be surprising
Right. Right.
for
Thank you.
anyone
Very
who's
well.
in a sense that who is really inspired by Islam, for those
Yeah.
especially.
Yeah. Very well put. Thank you. I want to bring the audience in. I just have one more question, and then I will bring the audience in. One of my favorite passages in the book is where you wrote that Imam Ali's philosophy of worship was built around the idea that there is no, and I quote here, there is no benefit in recitation without contemplation, and there is no benefit in worship without comprehension. What a meaningful statement that is. Is that the kind of philosophy and understanding that resulted in some of his most special prayers and du'as? For example, Dua Kumail.
No doubt about it. I mean, I was recently reading Sahifa Alviya in Ramadan. It's so inspiring. Most of Imam Ali's prayers are focused on the idea of and concept of Tawheed. And in again, in these sectarian battles and sectarian narratives, we often focus so much on other minor things that we forget about the real essence of Islam.
Yes.
Why was Ali and Ahl Bayt important? Because they were the ones who truly reflect the message of Islam. The reason Imam Ali was declared as the spiritual heir and as the heir, actually, he was supposed to be heir in every sense of the word, it was because he understood the real meaning of Islam and he was taught by the Prophet in a sense that only he and his progeny could
Yes.
have delivered that message and could have kept it alive for the long time to come. This could not have happened without praise. And I respectfully, not challenge, but respectfully would say to anyone else, do you find any other important companion of the Prophet with whom any prayer is associated? It's not to be
Right.
polemical. I'm saying his understanding was so deep, and his inspiration was so bright, and his love for was so deep rooted that this poetry comes out of his
Right.
voice. And that
Yes.
then what is the source of inspiration? That's what the Sufis, Sunnis, and Shias actually in a combined fashion.
Yes.
It will only be Ahle Hadith or some extreme Wahhabis who would deny it because there's darkness in their heart. Um,
Right.
sorry, I couldn't find any other word. It is
No.
that's what inspires Sunnis as well as Shias and Sufis.
Yes. Yes. Indeed. His prayers and his character is loved by all, regardless of sect or group. Okay, so I'm going to now hand it over to our audience or our listeners. I'm just looking at the chat as we speak. I'm not seeing any questions, but I do see a couple of comments. One from Fayaz Bakr. And Fayaz Bhai, we will be recording, or we are recording this talk, and we will share it with you when it's ready to be shared. So keep an eye on the Mark webpage and on our Mark emails to get notification of when it is ready. I do see a hand up from Sister Sabika Shaban, so I'm just going to try and pick her up. And if I can't, I'll go to the next question from Fatima Jaffer. Sabika, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. Yes, please. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so very much. And thank you, Professor Hassan, for that discussion. I just wanted to firstly just commend on the incredible symposium that took place last month, was it, on the diversity and solidarity of Shi'ism. There was a panel that you yourself also moderated, which was extremely enlightening and rich. And it kind of, my question kind of relates to both that and this, in that there is a very strong indication that we need to, not only in the way that you wrote about Imam Ali in a very inclusive manner, but also that maybe we need to take a more inclusive perspectives when we are teaching about our figures in our faith, even in, for instance, madrasa and so on and so forth. What are your thoughts about, even when we're talking about our imams and whatnot, and we're teaching children in madrasa about these personalities, to kind of bring in all these other perspectives? For instance, even when we're talking about Imam Ali, to talk about what an amazing calligrapher he was, or how he's known in other let's just say secular texts for things that are not very central faith related, and so on and so forth.
Great question. I think this, at one level, is the responsibility of religious scholars. However, with social media and with now our access to libraries around the world, all these narratives and all these resources and texts are so widely available. You go on alislam.org, you'll find every major Islamic book. I'm sure there are many other such websites as well. One way is to emphasize more on learning and scholarship. Because if there's anything that differentiates the lovers of Imam Ali, it is learning and scholarship. At every point, and I've collected, you might have seen in the book, Imam Ali's all statements and declarations about the importance of knowledge and importance of learning. That, I think, has to come at the core of it. And as soon as we think about learning and education, the very first principles are that you have to be very open about resources and open about sources, I should say. Read every text. Recently, I was reading a book by actually a convert, a Muslim, an American who converted to Islam. He died recently, I think in late December, Sheikh Nuruddin Durki. And I read his book on Imam Jafar Sadiq. And it has been such an enlightening experience because, again, he's from the Sufi tradition, but then he would be invited by the Shias, Isna Ashri, to give lectures. He would be invited by the Ismailis. He would qualify himself as Naqshbandi, or not Naqshbandi, if I'm forgetting, Shadari system, one of the Sufi traditions linked to Hanafi Islam. And he was very comfortable in all these circles. I think that approach, at least from the learning point of view, has to be important. I remember when I was growing up in Pakistan, frankly, one partly because of my own mixed tradition, but we would go to Sunni centers as well as Shia centers. I've been doing this in United States. And in most cases, I learned that it is the lack of interaction between people from different sects or groups that pushes us into our own narratives. I recently had a couple of very strange experiences where at the, very briefly this time, I'll take not more than a minute, there was at the death of a senior member of the community in not here in Boston, some of a Shia figure, some of the Sunni community members also visited there. And one of them later on talked to me and said, well, I went there, but it was a very difficult moment because at one point I realized they were about to beat me up. I said, really? Do you think? It's impossible, inconceivable that you went to a funeral and the Shia community members would beat you up. Why you think so? He said, no, there was a majlis, and then they started cursing Yazid and others, and I thought they'll come for me. I said, are you with Yazid? Why would you think they come for you? And he's a very educated person. I don't want to give his title and what he do for profession. And I said later on to my friends, Shia friends, well, our communication and our narratives have become so specific and specialized that we cannot communicate it to others. We cannot even communicate the tragedy of Imam Hussein to somebody in a way that the other person understands and the person feels threatened. There's something to be said about that person's knowledge and lack of awareness also, I acknowledge.
Yeah.
But that's the point I'm making. We need to be much more open, inclusive, meet other people. Don't just stay within your own social circles, because you go to center and that's the community you go out with. I think that would be detrimental to the cause of Islam.
Okay.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Sister Sabika. And thank you for always tuning in. We appreciate it. Okay, we have a few more questions, so we'll need to get through these very quickly in order to make our timing. Professor, if I could ask you to keep your responses concise. And so the first one is from Sister Fatima Jaffa. I believe she's from the UK. She is asking, there it is. Thank you for organizing this talk. It's been very informative. Questions are insightful. What accepted notions of the life of Imam Ali ibn Abu Talib has this book challenged?
Great question, Sister Fatima. I think the most important one is that Imam Ali was not after political office. Yes, he believed injustice was done to him, but that was not seen as end of life for him. I also think, and I project, he's or his family or Bibi Fatima, those who say that they all campaigned for Imam Ali to become caliph, with all the due respect, I have issues with that. Because that would degrade, in many of the narratives, in some groups in historical sense, we go so deep into these issues that we degrade the status of these personalities.
Yeah.
I think they were above these things. That is what differentiated Imam Ali with everyone else. And secondly, the longest chapter, I think, or one of the longest chapters in the book, is about what Imam Ali did during the other time of three caliphs. Because between isolation to cooperation, to support, Imam Ali stood for them in certain cases in a strong fashion. And that, I think, it's not something very new, but that's not by and large accepted in a way, especially in the Shia community. And that among the Sunnis, for Sunnis, there are too many things to challenge them, but in a way that is respected. We don't need to, the final crux is, we don't need to demean anyone, any caliph or anyone else, to bring Ali up. Ali is already up. We need to be respectful and be careful not to offend the sensitivities of the other, while staying loyal to the traditions and to the reality and to the truth.
Yeah. So the next question is from somebody whose phone doesn't reveal their name, but it says, please speak to the teachings of Imam Ali and uniting Muslims today. Succession issue needs to be finally resolved. As a suggestion, Sunni ulama accept Ali, and Shia imams and Shias accept first caliphs and stop condemning.
Well, this is easier said than done. However, the ideal situation is, of course, and the way I give the credit to Ayatollah Tabatabai and Sayyid Hussain Nasr, one of the finest books, actually the first book, and if you have to read one book on Islam and Shia Islam, that is by Ayatollah Tabatabai and written by Sayyid Hussain Nasr, published by I think Cambridge, by Columbia University Press in 1976, one of the most phenomenal works. And there they mention it as well, that look, everyone should accept Imam Ali as the spiritual heir.
Yeah.
And the political office went to the others. That is a reality. Whether that's to our liking or not, that's what actually happened. When Imam Ali became caliph, and when he had communication with Muawiyah, he specifically mentioned in those letters that, look, you had accepted Abu Bakr and Umar by the same process that I have been picked up as the caliph. Indirectly, I know it might be hard for my Shia friends, brothers and sisters, to accept that in that sense. Imam Ali, in so many words, at times acknowledged and accepted the status of the other caliphs. I think that let's end it at that point and see Imam Ali as the bridge between the Shia and the Sunni. And that's what I say in the conclusion. Imam Ali is the bridge who will bring for the future of Islam everyone together, because on him there's a consensus on what his high status was.
Bravo, well said. From Sister Atia Hassan, two questions, two-part. I heard that one reason that Amir al-Mu'mineen moved to the capital to Kufa, was because paper was arriving by sea to Basra in Iraq. Do we have written proof of this? And secondly, is it true that Sayyidah Zainab, as a very young woman, set up a school for girls and women in Kufa?
Great points. I must acknowledge my ignorance to an extent that I have heard these, but I couldn't go into much detail on these 2 points. But thank you very much for raising these, especially the second point, which is worth probing. By and large, we know that Imam Ali had moved to Kufa, one, because he knew the biggest challenge was coming from Muawiyah and Damascus, and it was closer for him to lead those campaigns. Secondly, also, I think he was following in some sense what the Prophet of Islam had done, moving the capital, so to say, of his preaching from Mecca to Medina. And Imam Ali knew what is going to happen in the politics of all that. And he wanted the sacredness of Medina to be intact. I think that's why, and it was a strategic decision for him to go to Kufa. Those are seen by historians, but the 2 points you have raised are worth probing further. And you have raised some of these important questions. Send me an email or please be in touch with me. We can talk more about it. I can perhaps do some more research, and before the paperback comes in, I can add these aspects or discuss these in the paperback version. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Professor. From Bashir Bhai Datu, one of our former guests on this program, or previous guest, should I say. Since you used both Shia and Sunni sources, did you attempt to reconcile different versions of events, or did you present both versions and left it to the readers to make up their minds? Well, as a reader, I could probably answer that, but I won't. You go ahead.
Great question. What my intention was that I was trying to also fill in the gap that in English language, in Western tradition, there's not many biographies of Imam Ali. Those that are available are translated from Persian or Arabic or Urdu even. And those are in different groups by Sunni biographies, Shia biographies, and those are beautiful, but those are only meant for the people of those own traditions. So I claimed that I have read all those, and I tried to come up with a narrative without, if I had the first draft was actually on every point I was saying, this is Shia, what they say, this is what Sunni says. And then I thought this is going to create more division. This is going to create a different image that on every point people differ. And I thought I will use rationality. I will use my integrity as much as possible. Have to be answerable for this narrative. And I will see how this fits in. What is the pattern? There are many things that are said by so many people which would not fit into the narrative. When some of the Wahhabis had said terrible things and Muawiyah was able to incorporate those in the narrative, those failed the test of time, and those are no more popular because those would not fit in the character of Imam Ali. So I provided footnotes for those who want to go into the detail, but in my narrative, I tried to come to what is accepted commonality, and then which I was convinced that that's the truth. But Shabir bhai, I would be interested in what, if you think in your reading that is accurate, because that's my understanding.
I would concur. You did a bit of both, actually. You in many cases, using both sets of sources, you provided the information and you left me as the reader to not judge, but to form my own conclusion. And in some cases, you did give a how shall I put it, a firmer point of view. And so I would say, yeah, I would concur with your thoughts there. I'm going to move. Go ahead.
Very quickly. For instance, some of the issues where I thought my Sunni readers would be really surprised at some of those statements, interpretations of Quran. So I use Sunni sources, Suyuti or Fakhruddin Razi, so that they can't say that, okay, this is a Shia narrative, because those are mentioned from Sunni books. Thank you.
Yeah, right. It won't stop some people from doing it, though, unfortunately. But anyway, Sister Kaniz, I will bring you in a second, Kaniz Kimji, but I just have to bring in one more person who had a question before yours was in. So bear with me, Sister Kaniz. Hussein Bhai Walji, his question is, You rightly talk about knowledge being at the core of Imam Ali's tradition. You find it ironic that Western academia has a paucity of thought on the life and times of Imam Ali. As an academic, how do you suggest we address it? Great question.
Absolutely, and also there's an opportunity for me to really appreciate the support from Hassan Walji. I mean, for organizing so many events, for helping me connect with so many reviewers, for reviewing the book. I am indebted to Hassan Walji. I really hope other community members think it's not about me selfishly. It's about all those who are into the business of writing and doing research that we need. And this center in itself, I think, is a reflection of how much importance you are giving to scholarship and learning. So to Mark and to Hassan Walji, I'm indebted for your support. And I wish and I hope that others who will write, the younger ones, I will provide this service to them on behalf of you, because that's what you did to me. I will respond by helping others and supporting their work. So thank you very much. The question is extremely important. I think, I mean, this reminds me of what Tahira Qutbuddin says, the professor of Arabic literature at Chicago University. One of her works are one of the finest works on Imam Ali. She says that, in fact, some of the first translations of any Islamic text into English, from Arabic to English, was the sermons and statements of Imam Ali, before Quran was talked about in the Western tradition, before Hadith was talked about. And she mentions some scholars who say this because this was the beauty of the narrative was so powerful. But what explains why the Western culture? Because partly there was more focus on understanding Islam through the biography of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that's another area where Muslim scholars have to do much better. In fact, just because probably a large number of listeners here are from the Shia tradition, I would say a bit provocatively, try to find out any major biography of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam written from the Shia tradition's point of view. When you find one, please send me details. And that's why there's more need. The Western tradition is now coming to terms with it. And it is linked with the Muslim communities, how much they invest in university, by investing in chairs, by investing in book writing, by organizing events on books and scholarship and learning. When that will happen, it will translate into more Western interest as well, especially this is for Western Muslims.
Assalamu alaikum, Shabir Bhai and Dr. Hassan. I always was wondering why Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam left writing the note right towards the end when he was ill in bed. Why couldn't he have done it earlier? Why did he leave it right to the end?
Well, thank you for the question. We are not sure, but again, I think the most important thing during the last days was Ghadir Khum. And because what Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, what he had done was everything, what he did was at the height of perfection. That's why this argument that if what was supposed to be written was extremely important, then it would have happened. If Prophet had helped if God had helped the Prophet with Hazrat Jibreel and with so many angels in a battlefield and elsewhere, I have difficulty accepting that it was. I think that event was meant to show us what actually it showed, that some people had issues with it. Because if the Prophet really wanted to write that the next caliph is Mr. X, Y, it would have happened. It is also important from this event, we can interpret it in different ways. Maybe the issue of spiritual heirship or succession is the most important one. And that happened through numerous Quranic verses, through so many hadiths. What the Fazail of Imam Ali, no one dare come close to it. You pick 10, I challenge that to anyone. Pick 10 companions of your choice and get the Fazail of all those 10 in one side of the balance and Imam Ali's on the other. And it will take a second for it to go in one direction, the side of Imam Ali. So that was an incident which explained the politics of the times, which explained some of the challenges, but it was not that somebody could stop the Prophet from doing what he had to do because of the divine injection. Whenever he wanted to do something, like in Khadir, it happened. That would be my take.
Thank you, Professor Abbas. And I won't be taking up your challenge on that one. From Qurban Bhai, after being struck by a poisoned sword, he was seen by a doctor. in your research, have you been able to find out more about this doctor's visit and how the medical profession was practiced at the time in Kufa?
Great question. This is for young scholars like you to research. My purpose was to do a major central biography. And these are very important questions. For instance, twice or thrice that I've read the book since, my family members say, who have helped me greatly, by the way, my wife, Binesh, and my daughters, Zainab, Zahra, and Sherbano, and it's not customary that I'm mentioning their names. My daughter, especially Zahra, I think wrote so many beautiful passages or changed so many of the passages. They often see me reading the book again. And they said, Baba, why are you reading your book again and again? And I said, no, because I'm marking what are the major instances, things that I've missed out. So these questions are hopefully next with Hassan Walji, Brother Hassan Walji, we are planning to do an anthology of some chapters on each aspect of Imam Ali. Hopefully, inshallah, it will work out. But thank you for alerting me to this.
I should have actually mentioned in the biography section earlier on that Professor Hassan Abbas is married and has 3 daughters, which apparently is a sure passport to heaven. So well done. Good. Okay. The Sister Atia Hassan's third question was, I've heard that Imam Ali initiated a number of community development projects, including civic structure improvements in the 25 years in Medina. I guess she wants you to just comment on that briefly. Thank you.
That is so true. Absolutely. I mean, some of the Imam Ali's contributions were in terms of pathways. And we know that he was good at digging wells, but also the land measurements were done because of Imam Ali. So many of these scientific things at that stage and age, the kind of modern urban planning, if I may call that, that came out from Imam Ali. Secondly, what is in the book also, that he had traveled a lot during those 25 years. I was earlier asked if there's something new in the book. Imam Ali's travels to Turkmenistan. When I went to Turkmenistan, and I found a small town called Hazrat Ali town. And I went there, and they have sent a series of mosques, and they say, Imam Ali came here, he lived here. There's a beautiful stone on which I had the honor of sitting. They said he used to meditate here. And believe me, the feeling I had on sitting on that stone, I have pictures of that place. I can share more details. That story is in the book. So yes, Imam Ali did so many other things which are not part of the mainstream. I've given hints about those in the book so that someone else can pick it up and write more.
Okay, that's great to know. From the gentleman or the person whose phone won't reveal their name, can you clarify if the Prophet could have written his will, as we are told he could not read or write? I did want this to focus on Imam Ali, but if you care to comment on that briefly, I'd appreciate it.
I think the Prophet's whole life was his will, through Quran al-Hakim, through training a set of people in Ahlul Bayt who were able to be the speaking Quran. That was his will. And that's how I think it's better to look at that. Because political succession issue, and that's one important point for all the audience here to rethink how important that was really. And whether Imam Ali being in the spiritual chair for the first time, he's the only one who had the honor that he was both the spiritual heir and then he became the political heir as well. So Sunnis also believe him as a political heir, although as a fourth one. And I've heard many Sunni scholars, most recently Pakistani Sufi Pir Meher Ali Shah's tradition in Islamabad, who was asked this question. It is on YouTube. He was asked, so Imam Ali was 4th Khalifa and Caliph, so he was 4th in number in terms of his stature or level. And he said, no, is it Adam as prophet has the highest caliber and the prophet is the last, or prophet is the last, but he is the most important of all the prophets. So in the sequence of becoming a caliph is no sign of superiority in Sunni tradition also. So that's what I would say.
Okay. Comment briefly from Muhammad Bhai Maulidina of Orlando. Congratulations, Dr. Hassan Abbas. Very interesting and informative book. I especially love the timeline section in the front of the book. I believe he's referring to that, which gives an excellent source for cross-reference to easily look up the chronological events of the history of Islam. Thank you for that, Muhammad Bhai. I'm going to have to pause. I'm going to have to end it very soon now. one last question from Fayaz Bakr. What does the process of succession tell us? The reverence for power and knowledge as a source of authority in Islam. What does the process of succession tell us? The reverence for power and knowledge as a source of authority in Islam. Perhaps you try that.
At that moment, I mean, you're right. It was very clear. The Prophet had said, Imam Ali had said later on in his sermon in Najl Balagha, especially the letter to Malik al-Ashtar, and another major important sermon, when he was asked, what is the criterion of a leader? And Imam Ali's most beautiful answer was, which I think we can close with that. He said, leadership, to become a leader, what exactly he said? Service to humanity prepares you for a leadership role.
Mm-hmm.
So it is the service to humanity.
Yes.
It is the love of the people. Imam Ali's sermons, one after the other, all they tell us one thing: welfare of the people, irrespective of their caste, color, or creed. That's the central message. That came out of his knowledge. So, but it was political also, as a political governance person, and Fayaz Bakr Saab is an expert on governance issues, so his question is a very thoughtful one and deeper one. So for governance, Imam Ali's, even the governance model came out of his knowledge and the special care he had for the ordinary people. So these all linked, and Muslims actually came to this realization when they went to his door, knocking hard, saying, for God's sake, we need you as the caliph. No one else had that honor. That was the realization that the top spirituality and the top level of knowledge is the one which is so necessary for someone to become a caliph. Things had gone in a terrible direction. They knew Ali is the only crisis manager.
Yes. Sister Atia is asking for your email address. If you'd rather not say it out publicly, I can send it to her privately.
Most certainly. You have my email address, which you can share, or I have actually copied, and I will send that to her. I've copied it in my...
Okay. All right.
Right after this, I'll send it.
Great. Okay. So I want to thank you, Dr. Abbas, Professor Abbas, for being with us today. Tremendous insights and interesting background into the book, how you prepared it, and what went into writing it. So thank you very much for that. I learned, as I said, an awful lot from it about the life and times of Imam Ali, and I hope you, our listeners, will avail yourselves and pick up a copy from wherever you can and read it, because it is very readable. It is not aimed at academics per se, and it is not very hard to read and understand. So thank you for joining us, and please stay on for our next two announcements. I think you'll be interested in them. Two brief important announcements. Yesterday, April 23rd, many people celebrated World Book Day. It's sponsored by UNESCO. Its purpose is to inculcate reading habits among people, especially youth. We at Mark also want to celebrate the occasion by inviting you, our subscribers, to tell us about the books that you really like. Is there a book in particular that has touched you? Any book, Islamic or non? Do you have a favorite book that you'd like to share or recommend to others? Is there a book that, in your opinion, highlights the pleasure of reading? If so, please tell us why by going onto the Mark website and writing a short book review. No more than 150 words, please. No more. There is a section on the website, markresource.org, where you can easily do this. And in a moment, I think the instructions will appear on the chat page. So take a look at it. But here goes. Thanks, Professor Abbas. Please stay on. On the homepage, click on Library, then click on Review a Book, then on Book Reviews, Write a Review, and off you go. I'm adding, or we're going to try adding those directions to the chat screen. The book review that you write will appear on the Mark website, but we reserve the right to remove any reviews that are not consistent with our principles and purposes as an organization. Please submit your book review to us by Saturday, May the 8th. Thank you very much for that. Our team will read all those reviews and choose the one that we found most interesting, and the writer of that review will be invited to read it out in a review or in a short video, which will be posted on Mark TV, with their permission, of course. My second announcement is about next month's session of Conversation with Authors. As you will see from the image on your screen, which should be appearing shortly, on May 22nd, I will interview Fatima Farheen Mirza, the author of a novel entitled A Place for Us. This book is now a New York Times bestseller. It is a story of family, love, identity, and belonging that was named one of the best books of 2018 by the Washington Post, NPR, People, BuzzFeed, and other media outlets. Now, important to note, this session will not be recorded. It will not be recorded per the author's request. So do your best to tune in on the day itself. That's the 22nd at 12 noon, May 22nd. As usual, there'll be time for questions after the main interview. And I'm just making sure that I haven't missed any other things. I see 3 more chat comments. I want to make sure I pick them all up. Thank you to Dr. Hassan. Thank you, Dr. Hassan. Very grateful for the support. And that would appear to be it. So with the time now at 1:09, it's probably time we ended. It's coming up to namaz time. Professor Abbas, thank you. And yes, we will let people know, and I think we already did in the invitation, that they can buy your book at Amazon or Indigo Chapters or any good bookseller. So once again, my sincere thanks to you for joining us. And with that, I'd like to end our session. Thanks to my AV team, Hasnain and Zara, and to all of you for joining us. Stay safe, everyone. Have a great weekend. Take care. Khuda Hafiz.